Welcome everyone to another episode of Notes from the Aleph. An Aleph is a high point from which all things are visible, and from our vantage point we'll be looking at tabletop role-playing games, their design, and the theory behind those designs. Around here our motto is be fair, build up, and have fun. I'm your host GriffinVarro, joined by our editor Theta, our local designer Norman Rafferty, and our good friends and GMs RedRabbit and Lessons Learned. When it comes to tabletop games, I have 15 years of experience running, playing, and frequently fixing problematic rules at the table. Pronouns are he, him, they, them. Rafferty, why don't you go first?
Let's wait till you go first. Hello, I'm Norman Rafferty. He, him. I work for Sanguine Games. We make and other angry indie stuff. Look for me, Angry Indies, at MagFest. It's coming up, where we're going to talk about like all the things we self-publish. We've self-published dozens of things.
Red, your turn.
There's the button. Hi,
Hey.
I'm this is RedRabbit. I'm a GM for our Wednesday Ironclaw game here on the channel. I'm a lover of all kinds of interesting and esoteric tabletop role-playing games, and I consider myself a student of game design and of narrative design.
And last but not least, Lessons.
Oh, thank you. I am Lessons Learned, Lessons1 on Twitch. I go by he, him, and I am a published author over at Amazon on Nights and Stars, a short collection of speculative fiction. I also run a game on Sundays here for the wonderful crew at Practice at 6 o'clock Eastern. And of course, I have my own channel over on YouTube as well called Lessons Learned.
All right. So, moving to today's topic. Well, you know what? Games today are too easy. I feel like I never die. Let's go back and play some of those old games and see how that go. Oh no, all my characters are dead. And I made 12 of them. Old school RPGs are portrayed as being overly aggressive death traps for characters, but people did actually play these games and they did well and even play 20 level characters. While it may seem contradictory to say that they're deadly and then have examples of people who thrived in them, well, let's go over how exactly you do survive these games. And of course, we're going to dust off our local Rafferty here and start with you and say, hey, how did you survive these games?
Oh, how did I survive them?
Exactly.
I am going to take the I'm going to go real politic on this and say that all those high-level characters are all dirty cheaters.
There you go.
You know me, I'm constantly ranting against stuff like Elminster and Drizzt, and so that one guy from Lord of the Rings, whose name, Legends of Five Rings, whose name I can never remember, who are these impossible builds that are emphatically not possible in the rules or are house ruled to heck and back, such as the reincarnated lizard man who shows up in Rogue's Gallery. D&D First Edition. Look it up. That these builds are like either lottery winning impossible. Like people are giving Dream shit over his Minecraft run. That people didn't actually get to those levels unless they were like started at 20th level or teleported there, or were like my favorite guy Robelar, who you can look up, who is a guy who used to solo game master with Gary Gygax, who just kind of bullshitted his way because
frustrated Gygax into creating death dungeons.
Robelar's strategy was to avoid die rolling whenever possible, because in old school games, magic didn't roll dice. You rolled to resist magic. Magic automatically worked. If you have a Cloak of Elvenkind, you're invisible. If you've got Boots of Elvenkind, no one can hear you. There's no roll for it. They can't hear you. They just can't. You sneak around. You just do. And so once you got all of those items, I mean, that's where roguelike video games come from, that you get these items that solve all your problems. And that's how you get to the end of Binding of Isaac or whatever. So yeah, I'm under the impression that like anytime you see all these old, like all these high level characters that you hear about, they have impossible builds or ridiculous rules or house rules in their favor. Which once again, I want to step back from Rafferty and say it's okay if you want a house rule in your game. I just find it incredibly suspicious that, when they hold up, here are the exemplars and the winners of our game. By the way, they're impossible builds.
Also, many of them wrote the games in question.
That helps, doesn't it? Being a friend of the author really helps, doesn't it?
Yeah. Being Ed of the Green Wood of Canada helps a lot.
Well, it's it's one of the oldest tricks, because Aesop's Man the Lion, where a man says, Like, lion says, I'm stronger than you. And the man says, what about this statue here of Hercules breaking a lion's back? And then the lion says, didn't a man sculpt this statue?
Wow.
Lions just need more statues. That's the real problem there. So
It does. Sorry.
Oh, I'm
I was
sorry.
going to say, it does point out another inconsistency or logical leap here where, you're talking about games that don't have a very strict, rigid formalization. It's always going to be a little bit tainted by like, oh, how generous is your game master, or how brutal is your game master? You could have a 28th level character in this game over here. You bring him over to this guy, and this guy kills you instantly because he just does other mean stuff that your first GM didn't.
Yeah, I remember back when I was reading like second edition manuals, they were already writing into the text and complaints like, sometimes GMs give you too much stuff. These Monty Hall GMs are bad for the game. You should definitely try to kill them.
Oh, I can toss some fuel on that fire. So, from what I can gather, I've been reading some of the journals of folks like the CRPG Addict and that sort of thing, because there was the shakeup where Gary Gygax was kind of on the way out, but the computer games, of the Gold Box D&D games, were coming in. And if you've played any of the classic 80s computer games, they're extremely generous with treasure, like compared to playing D&D. Like a normal D&D, you find all this crap, half of it's cursed, half of it's a statue that weighs 800 pounds. It's all this stuff you had to sort through, and money was extremely tight. But then you get to the computer game, and the computer game, you were literally dumping money in the street because money had weight in Dungeons and Dragons, and you would earn so much money you couldn't physically carry it. You could convert it to platinum and you still couldn't carry it. And so how did this happen? This is a computer game, and they made like 9 of these. You'd think by some point they'd figure this out. And the answer was James Ward. James Ward was one of the designers at TSR at D&D, and he always thought it was more fun when you guys got stuff and got a lot of stuff. And apparently Gary Gygax didn't like Jim Ward, and so if you read the Dungeon, I said not like Jim Ward, didn't like Ward's style, because if you read like the Dungeon Master's Guide that Gygax edited, there's all these notes in here that basically say, don't give them too much stuff, don't do that. Sure, it might sound good, but don't, not like that. And then after Gygax kind of disappeared and Ward was one of the custodians, that's when all the money started to show up. And then second edition is kind of rebelling against that. Like, I know Ward was here, and I know Ward says it's fun to give people stuff, but that's not really what fun is. Fun is getting randomly killed in tutorial level.
That's my definition of fun.
Well, there's the thing, because something goes back and forth, and even in some of the adventures that Gygax himself was like, oh yeah, well, there's not a lot of treasure, but this bad guy shows up, and he's a 11th level wizard with a staff of magi, a +5 rain, there's all this stuff like, if we kill that guy, we get all their treasure, and then it's not cursed because he's using it and using it against us. So
treasure for me, but not for thee.
What adventure are you talking about?
Well, for example, if you read the description, this is more second edition. When you describe the description of some of the NPCs
That's after Gygax is out, though.
From the ashes, but second edition. Oh, this guy shows up. It's like, you see the stat block, and it has like 20 magical items, and they always had a amulet of non-detection.
Oh, well, yeah. Second edition is where there's the bad guys were all kitted out and you get their loot. First edition, I'm thinking of Gary Gygax adventures, such as our favorite Tomb of Horrors, where you don't meet anybody kitted out with anything. It's a door that you walk through.
It's a door, yeah.
It's like, or when you get to the end, spoilers for like a 30-year-old adventure game, the guy's already dead. He's turned into a worthless monster that just kind of attacks you with instant death powers that none of your stuff works on. So the best you can loot is his corpse, which isn't worth anything.
I want to say Temple Elemental Evil, but he actually didn't write Temple Elemental. He wrote the first
part. Horrors has his name on it.
Yeah, he has a name on it, but it actually wasn't him. He wrote it.
Oh, well, Sajkanth is a little trickier, but that's also got his name on it.
Yeah. So.
But we could get the debate, but also these adventures usually high risk, low rewards. There were these monsters that could kill you, or bizarre traps that could reverse gravity, use spikes on the ceiling, or if you stab the wall, the room fills with blood and you die. And your reward for surviving this is just getting this.
Yeah. Also, we got to define old school, because old school could be anything that is not current school, right? Like it's not fifth edition.
All right. I will make an official definition that old school is everything before publication of Vampire the Masquerade. I mean, I know it's an arbitrary definition, but I'm picking that number. There's games that came before it because, for example, Shadowrun is not an old school game, because in Shadowrun you get shot 5 times in the face and walk away, whereas in Top Secret you could get shot and killed instantly. Or Mercenary Spies and Private Eyes, you could get shot and killed instantly.
Or you could roll up a character who's not a spy; he's actually just an engineer.
Right. Old school games are games like Dungeons and Dragons, where traps could kill you instantly. The Grimtooth's traps era. But like most people are thinking about bullshit like Rollmaster or RuneQuest. Like, holy shit. What's it? Is it called the Chaos Eater? What is that monster? Am I the only one who knows the monster in RuneQuest? There's a monster in RuneQuest that makes everyone mentally compelled to move at full movement rate towards it, and so you can get within melee range so it can eat you. And by everyone within range, I mean everyone within miles. And so what happens is you guys just all get up from your camp and you start running. And then while you're running, other monsters in the vicinity who are also under effect by this are also running towards it. If those monsters meet you, they will actually attack you. Despite the fact that they're being compelled to their own doom, they will actually take time out of their way to attack you. This is a monster in the book that's presented as something you would do.
This does sound absolutely hilarious, though, but I would never do
funny as hell. But it's
that's a nuke. That's a magical nuke. You put it in the middle of the city, and it's like, and teleport out. And you're out of range and just watch.
It's a tornado. You can see it coming. There's damages.
Yeah, this isn't your sissy D&D with your free teleport. This is RuneQuest, the game where anytime you beg for divine aid, there's a 2% chance or better it kills you instantly.
Yeah.
This is old school. Yeah, no, it's go ahead.
How do you make it to 20th level? It's big. Well, first of all, I think the couple of things I mentioned this before is like you have self-defeating mechanics. So people, once they reach a certain level, they're like, yeah, we kind of done everything that we can do here. So there's really no difference between level 12 and level 18, except maybe I can, sap somebody with a very powerful lightning bolt or disintegrate them. And then you want to disintegrate somebody, it's funny. The 5th time you do it is like, it's okay, right? Or you have the world and multiverse campaign where you keep, basically you're a murder hoping your way through the town, city, country, planet, dimensions, and then you go to the gods and kill them, right? And of course, in that way, you kill so much stuff and taking so much magical stuff because these high level monsters have some of the stuff. It's like, I don't know, I made an angel killing sword with the skin of an archdevil or something. So I guess I can kill God now.
Well, yeah, D&D kind of invented that idea that you have to keep killing. So obviously, after we kill monsters, we have to kill gods, and then came up with books that had hit points for gods in them. Which is weird because if you were going by like the anime paradigm or that kind of story paradigm, like the Batman paradigm, if you just got more badass, then you just have more badass people come up to oppose you for things. Doesn't have to escalate like that, but that's kind of it. But also we haven't heard from Red yet. Like, Red, how did you get your characters to high level?
I got my characters to high level by running a really long game for the people playing in my game, but I don't think my highest PC I've ever played was probably like level 14 in like 3rd edition. So it was a very different time from this period we're talking about. And
right, because 3rd edition is when they get rid of random resurrection failure.
Yeah. Also, I mean, I was playing with my friends and we were in like middle school and high school. So a lot of the rules we just didn't read, or we read wrong, or we were making up as we went along. So I don't know if it really counts as getting to a high level. Really.
Well, I mean, and once again, I'm not saying this to be disparaging, but a lot of folks are living, gaming in the post-video game era. Like, as I'm always fond of saying, back then we didn't call them roguelike permadeath games. We called them games. And I don't say that because they were better. I'm saying the theory was you played the character and getting to high level was skill, but also chance. because you could at any point be randomly killed. You randomly rolled your character, you randomly got starting stuff. Maybe you could take the character and get and see how far you could get before you quit. And that is not how anyone plays a modern game. You look at the text in a modern role-playing game, and they'll tell you, in the text itself, make someone who is an avatar of you, make them an expression of you, pick all of their descriptions, their genders, their personalities, make someone you would actually want to be, choose all of this consciously, and then express yourself in a game world that is also what you would find fun and interesting. And they don't word it like, take whatever you got randomly and try not to get killed. They don't say that anymore. And that's fine. But that also means like it's a lot easier to level up in these games because you will level up. Leveling up's a function of time, and you get to choose how you level up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big 3rd edition renaissance for 5th edition for Dungeons and Dragons. The big 30 renaissance was that idea of like, hey, making characters is fun and could be a selling point for a lot more people. So let's just give them a lot of cool rules for the character creation part of the game, because people get off on that. They like that. And then the problem is suddenly when you start killing those characters randomly, people have a lot less fun with that. I think that's where the first...
Well, that's why I brought up there was a joke on Twitter about like someone joked about how did like, oh no, this first level encounter killed my entire party. It wasn't supposed to do that. And I was kind of joking of how did you have a combat encounter and not expect that they might lose? Like how why is this even a discussion that we're having? But that's how divorced they are from it. And like that's what I find fascinating about a lot of modern games is the idea that that you would win every combat encounter. Like is the idea of a TPK not an idea that people acknowledge anymore? That's fine if we don't.
Right.
But we have to write the game differently.
I think it's terrifying. I think it's terrifying. That's what it is, as opposed to, and terrifying not in the sense of, oh, we lost, but rather the whole game just implodes if you have a TP.
The investment is all gone, right?
Yeah.
Right. That's why I was talking about your session zeros and that kind of stuff, because like I don't mind if you have like a lot of planning before the game goes in, we all decide what we're going to do, but that is the opposite of Dungeons and Dragons core DNA, which is the game is trying to kill all of you. We can keep bolting new rules on it to try and nerf that, but that's the core engine there.
In many ways, that's the story of D&D, though, right? Is like, hey, what can we do to make this thing more appealing to a wider audience? And the more they have pulled in those directions, the less the core gameplay mechanics make sense. And I think it's something that they've been struggling with for a long time, and they still are. And hey, they do get to say the world's most popular role-playing game, and good for them. But when you peek under the covers, you see there's a lot of weird contradictory stuff going on in there.
It's people playing. Yeah, they recently had to scrub all the alignments out of the game because they discover people don't like that. So, it's I mean, that's why I've been examining this because like when we talk about role-playing game elements, like when a video game advertises, we have role-playing game elements. What they mean is the longer you play it, you get more points. You log into Call of Duty, even if you totally lose and score 0 kills, they will still give you experience points so you can unlock a new cosmetic or a new thing or whatever, a new achievement. Experience is a function of time. You can't they will not kick you off Call of Duty for sucking.
Forget Call of Duty. I mean, the entire MMO genre. I mean, it's all video games, you're right. But yeah, at least in Call of Duty, not that I'm a defender of those games, but at least there's like a skill that you're developing, like a physical reflex. But you look at MMOs, my big issue that I have with them is that they are literally a function of time. You look at PvP in MMOs, and it is exclusively whoever put in more time playing the game is going to win that conflict. All competitive RPGs, Pokemon is the same thing. It all comes down to how many hours did you sink into this?
Yeah, which I don't think is necessarily bad. But I think
fucking hate it, but that's fine. Obviously, I'm alone. There's a lot of people that love these games.
Well, no, I don't play MMOs. So, I don't think it's necessarily bad that the concept that the longer I play this character, the more agency and it develops in the game. I actually think that's a good thing. That's why I was against the session 0 thing of why don't we play the game and see what happens with the character? Because if I go to session 0 and decide I don't like the character, I wasted all of that time. Or if I get killed in the next thing, if killing me is actually an option, then we just waste all this time planning my character because I got killed in the first day.
Yeah.
And if I'm not going to killed in the first day, then we need to start asking those questions of
what are we doing here? Why are we fighting if there's no chance of failure or of death?
Well, I still think that can be interesting because why are we fighting if we can't actually be killed? And the answer is because there has to be a victory and a failure condition when we get into stuff. But I think to get closer to this, when we talk about getting a character of a high level, it used to not be guaranteed that you would get to a high level, because if you got killed, there was always a random chance you would be permanently destroyed by anything. Because it's like when they went to res you, they had to roll dice. If it failed, that's it, you were gone. And
there are a couple of things that I want to bring in, because even in that sense, the game is contradictory. I think in many ways the game, especially going to first edition, when you had like Stronghold, stuff like that, in many ways the game was built for you to retire your character. So the point that when you go read Dragonlance, they even put a soft cap and a hard cap on level 16 and level 18, where it's like, oh, you level 20. Nobody gets to level 20 in Dragonlance because that's too much. We gotta have level 16. And maybe if you're like Dalamar or something, you might get a level 18, maybe, right? But for example, I think when you hit level 9 in first and second edition, you don't get any more benefits, except if you're a spellcaster, you get more spells, and if you're a fighter, you get more hit points.
That's it. Level D&D first edition had arbitrary level caps, where it based usually if you were a non-human, you had level caps. Humans did not. But there would also be point of diminishing returns. Like when you got to a 13th level fighter, after this you just get like a flat 2 hit points per level, and your THAC0 doesn't increase at all. I mean, it's like incredible diminishing returns. But some classes like Illusionist, didn't have any limits on them at all. Just level up forever. Second edition got rid of that arbitrary maxes, and everyone could go up to level 20.
What they did is they changed the rate of it. I believe everyone had different experience point.
No, that was since that was since
that's also first. In second edition, everyone had the same experience point chart. There's an option in the back of second edition. In second edition, everyone earns experience points for different things. Like the rogues earn experience points for treasure, and the warriors earn experience points for killing things. A rule no one actually used.
Of course.
But also,
if I remember correctly, the tables still were different, though. It was third edition that made them all the same. Like literally,
third edition definitely makes all of it the same. Third edition just flat out says that everybody's going to. Well, also in second edition, they had your prime requisites, which was if you rolled high enough on your stats, you got a 10% experience point bonus. A very weird rule that I forgot about until I went back and played D&D was that the benefit of having high stats wasn't actual like improved skill rolls and crap. It was you got 10% extra. You leveled up faster, which is a really weird way of doing it. It's like, you can play a fighter with a strength 12 if you want to, but we'll make you level up slower because it's harder for you to level up.
Well, that just ends up rewarding people who just got lucky, I suppose. It seems so weird in design. It just immediately sounds toxic to me.
Well, D&D is the last holdout for random, because I believe 5th edition makes you randomly roll your stats. That's the default.
It's an option. It might even be the default option, but there's others in there.
And I always that's the default. Whereas, that's why we talk about how people get high levels. If I showed up at your D&D game and I had all 18s and all of my stats, players would get mad. If I grabbed a handful of dice and rolled in front of them and rolled all 18s in front of them and wrote that down, Like they would go, that's a miracle, but they would still resent me for rolling higher than them. And I've even met some GMs who, even if you rolled an 18 honestly, get all upset about it because you didn't earn that. That's just something randomly that happened. Despite the fact that, once again, I'm complaining about D&D's DNA. It's baked into the game itself that you have random entitlement. If it randomly happened to you, you're supposed to get it, and the world is just better for you.
And that's the growing pains. I know this isn't the point, but just to bring it back to something we said earlier, the when everyone was rolling all of their scores and getting bad scores and getting expendable characters out of it, that was part of the fun. Now people are curating very specific original characters that they care very much about, but they still want to roll for abilities because of the chance that they will get to play superpowered characters. And in many cases, the people who are proponents of this system are also have house rules that are like, oh, you roll 6 sets of stats and you pick the one with the most 18s. Or if you roll under a combined total of like 70, then you scrap it because who wants to play an average or suboptimal character?
Sort of an inverse of the innkeeper rule. You rolled up a god, everyone else now just has to live with it.
Well, and that's why I say, how do people get these characters? They cheat, because it's kind of like, okay, roll, but re-roll, random stuff. And if you really don't like it, plus also if you really don't like the character, you could quit and come back with another character. Because I've been in games like that where players just, keep quitting and coming back, and they're like, I wasn't having fun with the old character, so I rolled up another one. And I would say I can't help but notice that everything about this new character is better than the old one. Wow, funny that.
The going rule for me right now is, you use standard array, everyone does it. If everyone agrees that they'll let you roll your stats, then you can go ahead and roll them publicly where everyone can see it one time. And if you don't like that, then you get a pre-gen for this session, and you can try again next session. That's where we cut it.
Right, but I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're rewarding that kind of behavior. I mean, it's kind of like, everyone tells me, well, I have a house rule against it. Okay, you have a house rule against it. I'm arguing about D&D, like what's they put in the book. What they put in the book is how we have to assume that what they put in these books is how they intend people to play the game. Because some people say maybe they don't intend you to play the game. It's like, why would they put it in the book if they didn't intend you? Like, what madness is this?
Yeah, well,
you guys just leave your poison out so that and say, if my baby doesn't intend you.
Right. Again, it's Disney. At this point, they're so big that it's more about not alienating or estranging the people who play while getting as many newcomers as possible, and you get this very Frankenstein patchwork of. I mean, when I say Disney, I guess I don't know if you guys have Disney Plus. Right now, every Disney movie that came out before 2010 carries a warning in front of it that's like, "Hey, this represents cultures poorly." And that's a whole other thing.
They did that to they did that to D&D. They copied and pasted that and put that on D&D.
Right, very much so.
Which I found that's a different debate. Wow.
That's a different thing, right? Maybe that's just a culture that we live in today. But I think there's a philosophy there, which is of like, if you took skills out of 5th edition, or if you took rolling for stats out of 5th edition, you would piss off a lot of people who would say, this is not my D&D. But if you leave that stuff in and just figure, just play with the rules you want. Play with whatever makes you happy. As long as you're paying us, you can do whatever is good for you. And that works for a lot of people, apparently.
And I'm saying it's like they don't have a statement in D&D 5 that says these rules were wrong then and they're wrong now, but we're still sending them to you.
They will indeed.
I'd love to see it.
That would be hilarious. Put that in the book.
Letter from the editor. My first experience running D&D First Edition was a miserable time, and I hope you have a miserable time too.
I like to flip this around and call this the League of Legends problem, if we're going to talk about that, because League of Legends is a game that's notorious for being incredibly toxic. It's a video game that folks can play. I've never seen a video game before that had like 3 warnings on the opening screen that described, hey, if anyone's mean to you, report them here. Here's another button to report them, and look at our new reporting tools. And it's like, why is this game like so incredibly toxic? Like, there's plenty of play for free games out there. Why is the League of Legends fandom so terrible? And the reason why they're so terrible is because League of Legends is the same problem a game like D&D has or whatever, where it's got shitty rules. Have you guys ever played it?
I have, and I have some opinions too, but you go first.
Yeah, well, it's not friendly to new people, and the basic crux of it is you're supposed to earn money during the game to buy equipment. But in the equipment list, 90% of the equipment is garbage. Doesn't apply to your character. In fact, there's only like 1 or 2 pieces of equipment you can buy, but they still have all of them. They patched it so now they have a quick buy menu, so you can just write down the stuff that you want to auto buy. So once again, selling point of the game, thousands of pieces of gear to equip your character with. By the way, if you equip any of these, everyone in your team will downvote you. But they can't downvote you anymore. They got rid of downvoting because that was toxic.
No, they just automatically vote to forfeit. That's what they do now.
They all vote to forfeit. They look at your character in the first 10 minutes, vote to forfeit the game, right? And people are wondering, like, why is this game, like what? Because it's that problem where the games are full of false choices that people like want to do optimal paths. And when you get to tabletop, it's not the same thing. People at a tabletop, a lot of them will say we're here to, role play and present ourselves. And I think when and that's like when those folks are getting high level, they're doing it despite the game, not because of the game. They're not, boning the goddess of magic or getting inherent levitation abilities because of anything that was in the game other than do whatever the hell you want. Like you already pointed out, often it's the author just saying, this is my self-insert character. And by the way, they're handsome and cool. And they start the game with 2 magic swords.
I mean, it's also the thing about you talk about GD. We always skip over 4th edition. 4th edition actually baked in the idea that you would go from first level all the way to 30 level. It actually had epic levels. I would have found running a 22nd level characters party a complete nightmare, because the way they did it was like, by the way, this one encounter has 22,000 hit points. And all your characters can do like impose 5 conditions. Plus the enemy can impose 5 conditions. So you have to take care of like 25 different conditions running at the same time. It was like, nope. Please.
I'm just kind of sitting over here going, what kind of, so? But then again, I hate fun. So
So
no, I'm also bad at math. Yeah, there's
the same thing happens in the same thing happens in D&D 5. Have you seen the write-up for the Tarrasque? And the Tarrasque is just one of those critters.
Oh, yeah, but this was built on almost everything past a certain levels, like because you're supposed to feed the Tarrasque once. It's really a unique monster. This was every other demon lord, every dragon, everything.
As an example, there's more than one elite monster. Well, this also gets into, like, I've already complained about the one guy who said what your turn should only take 10 seconds to process. And like I'm always making fun of that because like I can do my turn in 10 seconds, but the people I game with can't do their turns in 10 seconds. And also most people don't consider that fun. When you go watch the streams and stuff of people's games, just saying, all right, I move here, I roll this, I attack, I missed, go on. Like that's not fun to a lot of people. Like that wouldn't be very compelling theater and that sort of thing. But that's how fast you're supposed to go. But I don't know. I'm not talking so much like I've in D&D 3rd edition, back when they removed the restrictions, I did get 2 characters to level 20 in 2 separate campaigns. And it was a lot of fun, especially when you got to program your stuff. But that D&D 3rd edition, I literally had a fight in D&D 3rd edition where I died 3 times during a single combat. Like lethally failed and died. Because there are things you can get like Rings of 9 Lives or conditional resurrections to get through that. And so on the one hand, I was having, I thought it was kind of cool that we got our characters higher level. On the other hand, the fact that we would we were like dropping corpses and rezzing every 6 seconds is kind of like a little mental. You don't see that in the novels, guys.
Right, yeah. When you try to picture that, you frame it, you're like, this is not something that happens in the novels, in the movies. You've created a framework now where your mechanical world does not function in a way that matches with the narrative fantasy you're trying to emulate at all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like we're all excited about the Spider-Man movie that's coming out. Like, imagine if Spider-Man had D&D revolving door death.
Well, I guess he just kills Gwen like 3 times in a row. But I'd love to rag on League of Legends a little bit, compare it to First Edition, and come up with a theory of how to succeed. So let's go ahead and start with, man, MOBAs are a really weird niche game based upon a singular mod where if you don't know what's already going on, you're not in that crowd, everyone just assumes you're stupid despite the fact that no one tells you what to do. Ultimately, there's unrecoverable failure in the game, and you'll notice this is a very big similarity of what we're talking about. If you die, you die. In League of Legends, you don't die forever. You get like a timer or something, but you start losing and going downhill. You can't recover from failure after a certain point. You have already lost. And the reason this produces toxicity and makes people sore is because there's investment in it. Each of these games lasts an entire hour. That is explicitly way too far for a multiplayer game to last for a single round, like hands down. So you're invested, and if you fail, you lose all that time. Already sucks.
Yeah, especially with the downward spiral, which is why we just had our discussion about TPKs. Like, if the fight's balanced for 4 people, if one of you goes down, we now only have 3 people. Mm-hmm. So it's going. But this,
which is 0.3 teamwork.
To get this back to tabletop gaming, we saw the rise of the trap build. Back when your characters randomly leveled up, there wasn't a trap build because you weren't consciously choosing this. If I want to get a wizard who has prismatic, spray, I have to find a scroll of prismatic spray, which is random, make a roll to memorize it, and then cast it. So there's like these ultimate death spells that are awesome. I can't just choose to have them when I level up. I don't have that level of intelligent design. So there aren't any trap builds because it's random. It's a roguelike game. Now, 3rd edition introduced the idea that when you level up, you get to pick spells. Like wizards, just pick 4 spells.
And then you could pick the wrong one.
Right, you can just pick 4 spells, put them in your book. It costs money, but money is a lot more free than was whatever. Just put them in a book or whatever. And that meant that you could design your characters. In fact, because you leveled up in a specific way, they had the path in the book, and none of this was randomly qualifying for it. You could pick your stats. This turned into the discussion of, well, if I want to have this at level 20. I need to buy all of these other prerequisites, at 1, 3, 5, 7, and 10, and those things. And if I'm not optimal at these levels, I'm never going to be optimal at those levels. And that gave rise to build. Right, because that's new. This whole discussion of your player character is a trap build is not a discussion we had before 3rd edition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and so. Now we have people doing the opposite, where they're planning for their high-level characters ahead of time, and that's a different kind of level of toxicity because, you know me, I'm a bigger fan of games like Ironclaw and stuff that give you rewards when you level up. Like, okay, you accomplished this goal. I'm giving all of you swimming, something you would never buy because even though you spent a lot of this adventure in the water, I'm giving all of you swimming. Feel free to trade that in for something else. But that turned the game into something more emergent, where when you did stuff, you got stuff related to what you were doing. And if you wanted to be this optimal machine of death, you had to rebuild on your own. But the way the things that were happening, that's one thing that I resent about Dungeons and Dragons and those kinds of games. That I'm leveling up in a vacuum. Like what I do when I experience and negotiate and go across lands and solve prophecies, and resolve the clerical beast and all that kind of stuff. None of that has anything to do with how I level up.
Right, but even so, like, it produces that increased feeling of investment. You've spent so much more time on your character now, as opposed to one that you randomly rolled up here.
Well, yeah, but what bothers me about it is, I think it would be more fun, the leveling up experience, if you leveled up based on what you experienced. I defeated the clerical beast and thus learned piety. We had to wade across the dismal swamps, so I learned swimming or poison detection. If the things that you did inflected your character. And I think what a huge problem we have, like when I mentioned RPG elements, is you spend a lot of time and then other things go up, and these two had nothing to do with each other.
Which further decouples, it further decouples, how do I want to phrase this? I mean, I think it goes back to the idea of like, oh, character creation is going to be one of the big hooks. You know, people invest so much time in their character, and then playing the game is just something they do to earn points so that they can go back to the single player game of making their character as cool as they want it to be. And then also playing the game is just an opportunity for them to show off their character in a public setting, which gives it more value.
Oh my God, like one of the hugest things, I've seen this repeatedly across decades. Someone will say, I want to play Dungeons and Dragons. I've never heard of this game before. Okay, what do you want to do? And say, I want to throw a fireball. And the next thing that all of you have to say is, you can't throw a fireball now. You have to play the game for 20 hours. Well, they don't say 20 hours. So you have to get to 5th level. And getting to 5th level is going to take at least 20 hours. It's going to take at least, 4 sessions.
Yeah.
Right. Because if it's any faster than that, they don't say all of that. But basically, it's like, you can't do what you want now. This gets into the higher level character problem of like, I want to be Elminster now. I'll just write level 20 on my sheet and ignore all of that time. It's not like these characters aren't enjoyable and people don't like them, but they skipped over the boring part. Whereas today we keep telling people, you've got to level up to do all this kind of stuff. And you're right. It's like some players, including myself, are sitting here salivating at the chance of, I want to do this really cool thing, but you told me I can't do it until I get this number up to 7. So all this time when I'm not at 7 is suboptimal play. I'm thinking about that. Now, I've met some game masters say, man, I wish players would stop thinking about that, stop planning on that. But it's also like, I don't. It's like, it's a mixed message to tell them this is a game you can express anything you want. By the way, you can't do what you want until you've spent 20 or 30 hours in the trenches.
Right, you can't just dangle the carrot and then refuse to eventually give it. At some point, you have to give it to them.
And I also won't say that making characters isn't fun. It is a lot of fun. When you play these games, it's a lot of fun to like tinker and make a character. And these are games that expect you to give a lot of time and a lot of energy to play them. You need to schedule the time. You need to sit down for 3 or 4 hours. You need to build your life schedule around it. So I don't think there's anything wrong with enjoying making a character that you're invested in, that you think is fun. But I do think that that's the whole draw for some people. For some people, the whole draw is the performative play that we've talked about before. The idea of like, oh, this is a stage where I can do improv with my friends and tell jokes while someone tells a story in the background. And I think there's an element of the RPG play that a lot of people love an experience that just is not represented, because I think the books push the build your own character aspect. I think the actual plays push the, hey, tell jokes and be improvisers. But I think that kind of like at the play emergent gameplay is something that I love, but I feel like most people don't get. They don't even know that that's a thing that they should be shooting for or that can happen because they're focused on one of those other two things.
But can you... But the thing about emergent gameplay is that it's by its very nature unpredictable. You don't know when it's going to emerge, right? You set up everything and you hope that you get the situation. And when people, when you get to the emergent part, they forget the emergent part. They want to get to the emotion, so they go for the scripted. I want this to happen, so I need to script it in order way for it to happen. And people are like, well,
Yeah, I mean,
it doesn't happen because you cannot force people to feel in certain ways.
It's hard to tell people like, hey, this is a game where you're going to like single-handedly slay a dragon lord. And they're like, ooh, when can we do that? And then you have to say, well, that could happen. But like, it's hard to express that. Like, you know what? The goblin commander that you parlay with and negotiate with, and that you create sort of like an alliance with a gang of ravenous goblins because of like some interesting roleplay instincts and some good rolls. That's always going to be a more epic experience for someone than the scripted red dragon fight that ends on a mountainside. But you can't express that to people.
Yes, when people come by to tell you their favorite role-playing game stories, they're of one of two stories. The day I rolled a 20 and got everything I ever wanted, and the day someone who is not me rolled a 1 and then terrible, embarrassing things happened to them.
Right.
Those are stories that people tell you. I guess the third story is some game master will tell you how they fixed some broken adventure because
Yeah.
they could do whatever they wanted and didn't have to roll a 20 or a 1 to make it happen. But all three
There
of
you
those
go.
stories are emergent stories that people talk about.
Mhm.
I mean, like I guarantee you, if you read through the Tyrant Queen adventure published by D&D 5th edition, we all know it ends with you killing Tiamat or defeating Tiamat. I mean, we all know that. And the entire adventure is written in such a way that you will eventually defeat them. Probably not kill them because they're cooler than you and you can't kill things that are cooler than you. But I mean, it all ends with your victory. Every encounter I experienced in that was one step closer. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to challenge this a little bit by saying, how do people play those high level characters? I want to point out that, you know, as a designer, we've been experimenting with making games where you don't level up ever. We put them in as appendices because we're cowards and we thought some people might complain. But the default option in our games like Farflung, which is our post-human game, or Madcap, which is a silly game, or even Usagi Yojimbo, which is a franchise game, the default in those games is you design your character and this is you forever. You can tweak some stuff around if you want to, but the concept of leveling up and gaining more power, these games were approached with the idea of, why don't we start you at what we want you to be? This is Farflung. You want to be an eldritch, you know, a star being that flies through space at faster than light speed? Start with that. You want to be Rick Sanchez and make cool super gadgets that defy laws of time and space? Start there. And we don't have to level you up. Where do you go from there?
Yeah, I'm actually thinking of picking that up. I've been wanting to for a while. My budget hasn't been there, but yes, I've got the page
Well,
marked.
that reminds me of the thing I hated about Space Rip. People know the Marvel, which a lot of people love, the original Marvel RPG here, is that you could level up, but you didn't really level up, and everything was random. And I'm one of those people that actually loves to create their own characters. And I think the leveling up process is an enticement to keep on playing, because the way I feel is like, okay, maybe I don't get a fireball now, but I could get a fireball and I want that fireball, so I'm going to keep on playing, you know, to be the fireball. But if that's the difference between enjoyment and grind. If it feels like a grind, then I'm not going to do it because it feels like work.
It's
But if it
basic
feels
reward
like
to train you to a behavior.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
if it feels that I'm actually building up to something I really want, then it's not going to feel like a grind, and I feel like I'm actually accomplishing something. So, and that's very, very iffy, very nebulous. It could be the game portrays it one way and the other, or it could be a personal thing where somebody's like, "I'm enjoying," and the player behind is all like, "I just
well, I
want
mean,
to."
I will say that I had fun playing a lot of D&D 3rd edition and leveling my characters up from like 1 to 20. The process of going that far and starting as a noob and getting to be very powerful, that was fun. But I'm also like entertaining the idea of, but I went into Dungeons and Dragons knowing I am going to be lower, and then I'm going to be lower power than I want to be, and I'm going to level up to higher power. I went into that knowing that. And then one of the things I'm talking about here is when people go to play a game like Vampire the Masquerade, you know, they're not usually thinking, I'm going to start as a low-level vampire now, but I will level up to... They literally make it impossible. The only way to get, like, better blood generation is to kill other or have relations with other vampires already more powerful than you, and even then it makes you crazy. So like that's very much a game where you start as a super hard character, and leveling up is slow, tedious, if not impossible. And I'm not saying every game needs to be like that, but I mean, like, we started this with an examination of like how, there obviously people want to be high level characters because there's so many authors who, D&D just pretended they had a level 20 character and just wrote stories about them, and everyone wants to read about them and the avatars and the literature and that kind of stuff. So obviously people like that kind of stuff. The answer to the question of how did they get there, it's kind of like, once again, let's get rid of that DNA. Why are we cheating to get there? Why aren't we starting there?
Yeah,
It's a good
I
question.
think it's all about
Yep.
goals. I think, and how you present yourself. Right.
It is about what you want to do, but like once again, we're always complaining like, but D&D is the people assume role playing equals D&D, and D&D says you must play as a low-level grunt who can get killed. By the way, we're going to cheat so you don't get killed, and you'll eventually get. You're not having fun now, but play this for 50 hours, and then you'll be having fun because you're not stupid to play a game for 50 hours that wasn't fun, right?
So let's go ahead and wrap up on that note on one last fun question, and I'll go ahead and quick lightning round everyone. What was your longest lived character? Doesn't matter the game, doesn't matter how old school. Lessons, what's the longest lived character you ever had?
Oh. A character named Barakat, but that character spent 2 years between level 7 and level 8.
So,
if
well,
you know,
temporarily alive.
even though no, actually he was alive. It's just that in AD&D and Second Edition, there were life draining undead that always took your levels. He had the bad choice that every time he hit level 8, he would eventually meet an undead that would take a level back to put him back in level 7. And he did that for 2 years.
What about you, Red? What's your longest lived character?
It's actually probably an Ironclaw character, which is a little difficult because they don't have like levels attached to them. And if we're talking about D&D, it would be like in like 9th grade, I had a monk that reached level 14 and looked like Kevin Sorbo. I think that was probably the longest lived character I played in D&D.
What about you, Rafferty? What's your longest lived character?
My longest lived was Trigina, who was a level 1 human wizard who got to epic levels. I was chaotic evil, and we served the world emperor. I only made one genocide.
Only one.
Other people did more. I mean, it was an all evil campaign. I want to say that the most hilarious thing was when I had to fight a bunch of. We had a giant magic rock, and so the enemy sent giants to steal our giant rock. And who do you send to steal a rock? You don't just send any giants in. You send rogue giants. Ooh. So I want you to imagine people who are like 30 feet tall, dodge rolling using evasion out of the areas of fireball. And like I'm just sitting there going like, okay, they got high reflex saving throws and they're giants, so they have high fortitude saving throws because they have huge con. Phantasmal Killer. They save against that. Okay, guys, I'm done. I'm going home. Bring in the army because there's nothing I can do. But they didn't steal our giant rock. I want to point out they did not get our giant rock. But
at least your character survived.
But that was that was the most difficult fight. Everything after that. But we got all the level 20 because we were serving. It was a very evil campaign, and maybe I'll tell stories about it so people can like mock me of like you're the worst person.
And I get to go ahead and with mine. My longest lived, I think, was Ollerbin, an Wood Elf Ranger who lived so long because everyone else around him kept dying all the time to just stupid bullshit. He got to level 17 on the backs of everyone else and was traumatized for it.
That's the pro strategy. Play a ranger, don't involve yourself in any of the dangerous stuff, and you're good to go. Guys, I don't have lost picking, so it's all you. Yeah.
So I think we'll go ahead and end it there for today. Thanks for everyone for coming for another Notes of the Aleph. We stream episodes bi-weekly Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can come join us live at twitch.tv/Ractus. We also stream and record tabletop games on the same channel. You can come join us when we start at 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Sundays and Wednesdays. Norm Rafferty here is a partner and writer for Sanguine Games. Check out sanguinegames.com, join them on the Reddit, Twitter, and look forward to all of their upcoming projects, including Book of Corals, and go see them at MagFest on January 6th, where you can go ahead and see Rafferty in person and tell them about all the times you didn't die because you cheated. Also, don't forget to check up on RedRabbit and booking for a game over at startplayinggames.com as RedRabbit. And don't forget to check out our friend here, Lessons Learned 1, over on Twitch and YouTube, and see all of their great projects that they have going on and catch them live as well. And everybody, don't forget to be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and come see us all again. Till next time, everybody.
Bye.